what does it mean to kiss somebody? Exactly what's involved with same-sex kissing, with kissing across gender? What's going on there? What about people who want to kiss everybody without limit? What somebody doesn't want to kiss everybody? Question about cosmopolitanism and living in a city. It's about what are the rules and how do we make rules? And one of the commitments American culture has is that there's a struggle. A lot of good Americans don't want there to be fixed rules about how words mean. They want the meaning of justice, of truth, and of love to be negotiable and always under discussion and revision. That's what it means to be in city. You watch a show like Sex and the City. That was a great philosophical show. It was popular because it was exactly a discussion of what the word love means in a cosmopolitan environment among well-paid professional women. Okay? That was a very philosophical. So Plato's saying, can we establish fixed meanings for these terms? And that's all he was interested in. And math seemed to be the highest form of doing that. Okay? He never connected math to answering those questions, by the way. Right. He never did it. He failed in many ways, and he knew he failed. He was not a systematic philosopher, contrary to most of what you're taught by philosophy professors. He was very fragmentary. He was a great artist who wrote about particular things like love or justice. I mean, very complicated, poetically charged, and sophisticated rhetoric, which had nothing to do with math, so he was completely contradicting himself all the time. He was a great artist. And each of his dialogues is somewhat freestanding, uses different rules, because he was a good cosmopolitan, knows you can't find the answer about what justice is using the same methods you use to find out what love is. So his practice contradicts his theory about the soul. And he didn't think that was bad, because when you talk about dying, the rules are different. That's all. Yeah.
So, did he think that once you got as logical as you can get, you're going to somewhere else?
Yeah, there has to be somewhere else to go. So what he does brilliantly and funnily is to adapt the Greek ideas of the afterlife to his purposes. And he makes up places for philosophers to go, where they hang out with the gods because they're thinking clearly. Okay? That's not part of the Greek. It's kind of an adaptation of the school of mythology. But he's a good enough artist to shamelessly do it. Okay? So he gives you, it's like a big seminar in the sky. Plato is a brilliant adapter. He's like a great director. Right? This is again my theory. What he does, and this is really, think of music, for example. What he'll do is adopt different cultural forms that people understand for presenting information, and use different forms depending on the topic he's dealing with. When he deals with death and immortality, he goes to math, because that's reassuring, but he also clearly says that his guy, Socrates, who does all his talking for him, in the dialogue about immortality, listen carefully to this. This is a little more detailed than most people want. Pay attention to this quickly here. Okay, he does two things. Socrates gives this talk about immortality when he's on death row. He's already drunk the hemlock, he's dying. So everything he says is said in the face of death, or it's remembered the next day. All the talk is about when he's dying, and that's very important. Not when he's living. He wouldn't talk this way if he had 20 years to live, right? Number two, Plato always made a huge thing out of Socrates never writing anything down, because he said the only truth is in live dialogue. When you write something down, you kind of falsify it, because Zeus said it. What Socrates is doing on death row is writing, and he's writing fables, like Aesop's fables, and he's writing poetry, or he's recasting poetry. The only time Socrates writes is when he's on death row. And he compares himself to a fable maker. So when he's talking about what happens to the soul, he's saying two things. The only theory of immortality that makes sense is that the soul has something to do with mathematics. And number two, when I tell you about this, I have to tell you about it as a guy making up stories, because of course we can't really know for certain, because nobody's been dead and come back, at least literally. So when he's arguing for the immortality of the soul, he's doing it under the sign of not telling the whole truth literally.
Of course he wants his soul to be immortal. He's about to
No,
die.
but hear what I'm saying. He's sophisticated enough to know he's going to sound like a moron if he says, the soul is immortal, blah, blah. He's saying, here's a great story about the immortality of the soul. It's a story. Think of how subtle that guy was. So when you talk about the immortality of the soul, it has to be a story. Why? Nobody's been there until now. Despite what we're talking about reincarnation, nobody remembers. Anybody doing philosophy in the city has to be pretty subtle. And number two, Plato's not the guy you hear about. He's a much more interesting, complicated thing than most people give credit for. And any theory about immortality that he's talked about can't be directly proven. Just can't. You'd be an idiot. All the arguments for the immortality of the soul in the dialogue of Phaedo are bad. They're all crap. None of them work. You know why? They can't. But you can't prove the immortality of the soul. It doesn't take a big brain to figure that one out. The reason you can't is you can't go over there and find out if what you were telling the truth. But should you make the arguments? Absolutely. Because people want that. They need that. And there is evidence that there's something about us, the mathematical part, that could go on forever. So he's saying, I don't know what we can say about it, but it's there. Okay. All right, we're going to go on to Christ. I'm going to tell you things about the Christian view that you won't believe, that you probably never heard before and that you'll argue with, but that are right. Most of what you hear about Plato is nonsense. Most of what you hear about Christianity, all of it maybe, is foolishness. Here's the deal. Christianity comes out of a great desert monotheism. You know what monotheism is? There's a god there, and there's one of them. Greeks had a lot of gods. They didn't take any of them very seriously. Okay? They're really terrible. I mean, they took it, I mean, they had temples and stuff. But there were lots to pick, and they all misbehaved. The Jews were a different kind of, they're a severe desert tribe, living in a place that doesn't have a high water table. Right? They're poor. They scramble for every bit of sustenance they can get. They're tough guys. They live out in the back of beyond, where nobody else wants to live. And they're tribal people. Plato's a pretty sophisticated dude. He's living in a post-tribal society, which is so sophisticated that parts of Athens, voting districts, were named after fake tribes and clans that they made up to make people feel comfortable. I'm in the Boongod tribe. It's like Johnston and the Buffalo. Got to make up a tribal identity that you know is fake, but people like that. Anyway, Jews are really tribal people.